So, one of the things I wanted to make sure that we kind of understood is, why is this decision-making module within the product innovation course? Well, the product innovation is very different than product management. And one of the key areas is in making decisions and making hard decisions without a lot of information. So a lot of the things that you've learned as a product manager are going to not be that relevant when you get into an innovation project, especially an innovation project where you're starting from zero and you're defining what the opportunity space, defining the jobs to be done, defining what the first product's going to look like, defining the sequencing and the prioritization of what to build, and then trying to convince everybody in the organization to get on board with you. So this is a great blog post that I found very recently, a few months ago, on why PMs and pioneers or innovation leaders are very different and have to behave very differently. So I'll just read this to you so that we really understand, what is it about product innovation that is so different, and why is decision-making such a different skill in innovation. So he says, while PMs are problem solvers, they typically operate within a predefined problem set with clear guidelines. Founders or innovation leaders, right, pioneers, on the other hand, are the discoverers of the problem, the architects of the initial solution, and the resource allocators need to make the hard call on how to attack a problem. They don't just find solutions, they set the mission and then create the pathways to achieve where none previously existed. Moreover, great founders are able to thrive in ambiguity. They make decisions on the fly, armed with limited data, fueled by instinct and vision. A PM accustomed to data-driven decision-making and rigorous A/B testing might falter when the luxury of time and ample information isn't afforded. Founders or innovators don't have the liberty to await perfect clarity. They leap into the void, trusting their gut and adapting as they go. Like a pioneer, great founders like what the tools and information at their disposal, and make the best decision possible, right? So when you are a product leader that is on, an innovation project, you are going to be tasked with making lots of decisions with limited information, and in a way that really goes against the grain of how a lot of the other product teams that are working on mature products are working. And so your power skill needs to be to make these decisions, to have the confidence to make them, and to gain the trust and authority within the organization to bring everyone along with that decision, align people around your decision, get commitment from all levels and all layers in the organization about that decision, and then prevent that decision from being questioned again and again and again. And this is particularly important in, again, innovation projects, because when you're a product manager, these are like the degrees of freedom framework that I talk about. The thing that you have to understand is when you're starting a product innovation project, that is the big gray circle, you've got 360 degrees of freedom. You can do anything. And at that point, oftentimes people in the organization have lots of ideas about what should be done. And executives have their own pet ideas about what should be done. And in order to narrow down your degrees of freedom and get to a place where you're operating, with confidence, right, that your decision making is going to be aligned and going to be communicated and trusted by the organization, there needs to be a process and a way of showing up, right, that you take people through. Now, product managers, on the other hand, right, they make a lot of decisions as well, but their degrees of freedom in terms of, what they can actually do is much narrower, because a lot of the initial decisions have already been made, like who's the customer, what's the go-to-market strategy, how is the product priced, right? People are already using the product. They have expectations about the product. So it's a very different type of environment that you're making decisions within. And it often feels like, the product management processes for making decisions, I think really well outlined in that blog post, right? Rigorous A/B testing, right? If you want to make a decision, you A/B test. Can't do that if you don't have a product. If there's no A, you can't A/B test, right? Because you need an A and a B. You need an already existing product and then the change. So so a lot of the things that the product management team is doing, and a lot of the things that we learn, right, in courses around product management, and I used to teach mastering product management here at Reforge, those things really are not applicable or not as applicable when you're doing product innovation. And that's why this is such a critically important new skill to learn, because a lot of those tools that you learned in how to make decisions as a product manager, you're just not going to have available as a product innovator and especially as an innovation leader, where you're going to have to drive a lot of this process. Okay, so what do I know about this? And who am I, real quick? I have created this product innovation course exactly to help illuminate, folks who are coming through Reforge about how product innovation is different than normal product management. And I have over 20 years in innovation. Here are some of the things that I've done in the past. SVP of new products at Pendo, built and launched the Pendo Adopt platform, which I'll be talking about today. Was chief product officer at Nextdoor to completely revamp that product, set a new course and direction for it. General manager and head of product at AWS for Honeycode, where we came in, and I was the first general manager for this project. Wrote the PRFAQ, developed the whole plan, and then built Honeycode for AWS. I was VP at Salesforce, led the Lightning redesign, led the creation and the initial build of the IoT cloud, and then lots of other jobs, specifically in product innovation. So really taking a lot of the skills that I've learned throughout my career, and especially driving product innovation within large companies, which is really my expertise, right? Going into a big company like Amazon or Salesforce and starting with nothing, just an idea, and driving that to delivery across the multiple layers, right, of executives, around lots of different decision makers, complex processes, pre-existing, right, resource allocation processes. All of that adds another layer of complexity. And that's something that I learned the hard way through trial and error. And so I really want to create this course for people so that they don't have to learn it through trial and error. Okay. All right, so let's get into decision making. So when you're taking on a project, again, there are many decisions you're going to have to make along the way, some of which are going to be very high stakes, as Jeff Bezos calls them, one-way door decisions. And remember, in that degrees of freedom circle, your first 2 or 3 decisions when you're starting on a product innovation project are going to be one-way door decisions. Those decisions are usually what market, or like what's the ideal customer profile, like what customer are we going after in what market, and what is the basic sort of framework of the product that we're going to be building, and then what's the basic technology architecture, right, for that product are we going to be building. So those decisions are usually one-way door decisions. It's very hard to pivot out of that. You can, but then you start from scratch. Essentially, you have to throw away all of your work, right, and start with the blank piece of paper again. So, those decisions are very hard. But then as you go along the project, as you're working in narrower and narrower degrees of freedom, now you've got a lot of like little decisions that constantly need to be made. And you want to, both as an innovation leader, empower your team to make those decisions, but you also want to make sure that those decisions are documented, because it is really high stakes and it's not based on a lot of data. Remember, you can't A/B test, you don't have a whole bunch of usage data, because guess what? Nobody's using your product because it doesn't exist. So you're making these decisions based on what you know and based on your best guesses. And it's really important for everyone to be able to understand why those decisions are being made, right? And oftentimes you're in highly political environments. So as a product team, you might decide on something and agree on it, but then the marketing team questions it or the sales team questions it, right? So you need to have a way of making sure that the organization feels aligned and that they trust your decision making and don't want to reopen decisions once they're made. So that is sort of the context of this. All right, so I would love for you all now to answer a quick poll and get a little bit more context, so I can have a little bit more context about your own organizations and where you're coming from as I dive into this content. How would you describe your company's decision-making style? So these are the, four most common ones that I see, right? Collaborative and transparent, by teams in closed team meetings, right? So, people come out, they make the decisions, and within the teams, decisions rain down from above. Like when most people in the organization ask, who made that decision? They're like, I don't know. I was just told the executives made it. And in some organizations, people just do things and there's no explicit decision-making process. Like they just, kind of move fast and break things and don't actually take the time to make decisions. So, or, maybe there's something else that's going on. So please do vote. And you are not alone if you feel that decisions rain down from above. You are not alone because 34% of you, the most number here, the biggest proportion here, feel that the decision-making process happens somewhere above their heads, and they don't know why. And so the other thing that happens very frequently is this by teams in closed meetings. I would say that is absolutely, absolutely very common as well, which is, again, people hear about a decision that's made, and then they'll be like, well, who made that? When was it made? Like, well, who was in the room? Or if you were in the room, you might get this lovely comment. Well, I wasn't there. And so we need to revisit this decision because I wasn't part of it. Hopefully that sounds familiar to some folks, because I do know in, a lot of organizations, people who feel they should have been in the room for the decision want to reopen it if they weren't. Okay, great. Okay, let's keep going. Great answers. Thank you for your interaction. Okay, so when you're driving to develop a product, and again, remember, we have this context about, what your organizations are like. The lack of clarity about decision-making is often the biggest source of friction and delays, right? So hopefully that sounds familiar to you folks, that really not knowing how to make important decisions, not knowing who's making the decisions, when they're making them, what's going on, or very importantly, being able to drive and force a decision to be made by the people that you need to make it, right, delays your project. So I've been in the situation many times where we could not move forward until the CEO approved and said yes on the direction that we're going in, right? And I see some folks now smiling and nodding, which is great. So, and so how do you drive that? How do you get the executive team to really make that decision and to ensure that everybody knows that they've made that decision, right? How do you actually create this process? So what I've done is I've created this spider framework, and the spider framework looks like a six-legged spider, right? All spiders have 8 legs. This one has 6 legs. And SPIDER stands for situation, people, ideas, decision, explanation, and rollout. And so I'm just going to open this. So you will get this template, you will get this doc when Eleanor sends out the email about this recording. And so this is really the framework. You've got a little bit of an explanation about where this comes from and a little bit of context. But then the important thing to really outline here is that people need to know these components, these 6 components when a decision is made. So S stands for situation. What is the problem we are trying to solve and why now? And then here are the areas that we mine for data to inform this decision, right? And might have some company or product data, customer feedback, internal stakeholder points of view, those types of things, right? You're really trying to write out what is the context for making this decision. Then, very importantly, you're laying out who are the people involved in the decision making, right? Who is the person advocating for this decision to be made, right? If you are writing this document, it's hopefully you, that you are the advocate for not a particular decision yet, but you're the advocate that this decision needs to be made, okay? Now, who needs to approve the decision, right? Like, who do you need to approve the decision? The buck stops with them, right? This is the whole scenario where you can't move forward until the CEO makes that decision. You put the CEO's name down, you say they have to approve it, right? And so everybody knows that they're on the hook, and they know they're on the hook and they're on the line. They need to approve the decision. I have had situations where the CEO has pushed back and said, oh, I shouldn't be making the decision. So-and-so should be making the decision. We may or may not have a little conversation about that, about whether that's true or not, but you can change the name as well. The people who are asked for their input, right? This is very important when we get to the next section, which is ideas. The people who are actually asked for their input on the decision. And the reason you want these people listed is because you want to have it documented that these are the people you went to and got their input to make this decision. And if anyone is missing, this is the time to say, oh, you know what? You actually didn't ask anybody from marketing. So why don't we review this spider after you ask somebody from marketing, for example, right? So that, again, you're trying to prevent, very importantly, you're trying to prevent 3 weeks from now or 3 months from now, somebody from marketing coming and saying, wait a second, we weren't consulted on this decision. We need to revisit it. Right? That's what you're trying to prevent with this. And then the people who are aligned, right? The people who need to be brought on board to understand how to roll out the decision. Okay. Then you have the idea section. So you're listing all of the ideas that are possible solutions, for the problem, right? You're listing out all the ideas, all the possibilities. And here you want to be comprehensive. If you talk to the chief revenue officer, and she said, I have this idea. I think we should do this for this decision. And you think it's like totally like not even a dumb idea, but like not even feasible, right? You still write it down. Still write it down. You make sure that everyone feels heard, right? In this document. This builds a lot of trust. When people see that their idea is written down, and considered, that their idea was considered, and that the approver who's reading this document has seen their idea and considered it, that's really usually all they need, right? They're really not that attached to having their idea, be the one that wins. They're usually attached to the notion that they were heard, right? So you want to list, right, as many ideas that people have. You just want to list them, right? You want to list idea 1, 2, 3. You want to list their pros and their cons, just so that everybody, and you're trying to stay completely neutral in this section. You're not advocating for any idea over the other one. You're just trying to be like, objectively, here's an idea that I heard. Objectively, here's are the pros. Objectively, here's are the cons for this idea, right? So that's, so that's what's going on. And then, so you fill those 3 sections out: situation, people, and ideas. And then you have one of two paths forward. The first is if you're in a highly political situation, you may want to not fill in the recommendation for the decision section. So the decision isn't made until it's reviewed, right? In some way. But oftentimes, usually, you want to also put in your recommendation. As the advocate of this decision, you should have a recommendation. In most cases, you will have a recommendation. So you, in the decision section, before the decision is made, you write down your recommendation and why. Okay. And then you review it. You can review it in lots of different ways in a meeting like this. You can review it one-on-one with the approver, or you can review it in an email, right? You can basically just have, send it off to the approver and have them, document which decision, whether they agree with your recommendation or not. If they do not agree with your recommendation, you probably should have a meeting. So let's see, there are some questions. Let me answer some of these, okay, right now, since it's relevant to this particular thing. All right. How do you balance, and make sure you're asking in the Q&A tab, not in the chat. So if you do have questions in the chat, just move them over to Q&A. Okay. How do you balance communicating range of ideas with being concise and direct for the approver, especially if the approver is in a senior leadership position? So I have sometimes had a spider where there were like 7 different ideas, but not many more than that. Usually you can combine, some ideas, so they're basically in the same realm. I've never had, something where there's just been like, 20 ideas, especially if you go at a high enough level or a high enough altitude. You try to kind of group them together to be in the same sort of overall section. The other thing is, as you're talking to people, you can start to say, hey, generally we have 3 directions that I've heard. Which idea, do you have any idea? Do you have any thoughts about those 4 different directions? And then they're not kind of put on the spot to come up with something completely new, right? So again, you're trying to document you're not trying to like brainstorm 1,000 ideas. You're trying to document the few really possible solutions that people are attached to and want to pursue within your organization, right? So those will usually clump together. Do you say who brought forward the idea in the ideas section? No, but you may, if they're in the meeting, they will often want to advocate for their idea in the meeting. And that's perfectly fine. Or if you like to facilitate meetings where you say, hey, Joe, do you want us to tell us, this was your idea, why don't you tell us more? You can do that too, but usually don't put their names on it. Okay. All right, so let's move on. If you love any of the other questions, just upvote them, and we will come back to them at the end of the session. Okay, so you get the idea, you got all of the ideas down, you get the approver to approve the recommendation, or to want to discuss, or to go with a different idea, right? But remember, the approver is the final decider, and you as the advocate are essentially in conversation with the approver through this document about which decisions should be made. And then once it's made, you say it was approved on this date. Okay, the date is very important, because again, a lot of times people are like, wait, that decision was made? I thought we were still just discussing it. And you're like, nope, this decision was approved 2 weeks ago. It's in the spider doc, right? So again, there's a lot of these organizational and communication dynamics that tend to sabotage product development, and you can avoid a lot of them here. Okay, so then an explanation of why this idea was selected, and then the rollout. The rollout section includes the owner, so who's the point person responsible for rolling out and executing the decision, the communication plan, like who needs to be informed and how we're going to inform them, and then product and engineering next steps, and sales and marketing next steps. Okay, so that's essentially the spider. So let me tell you a little bit about how it works. So once again, if you just visualize the spider, it's a little bit easier to do this. Whoops, sorry, just having a little bit of this going on. All right, if you visualize the spider, it's a little bit easier to remember that the first 3 sections you fill out to make the decision, and then the last 3 sections you fill out once the decision is made to document the decision, okay? So in building Pendo Adopt, this was, the spider framework was, you know, so important. I came into Pendo, hopefully many of you are familiar with Pendo. It's a product analytics platform for product managers. And so Pendo wanted to expand their product beyond external customer facing product to employee digital products that employees use. And the executive team had been talking about this with the board for, you know, almost a year by the time I got there and was hired to be the innovation leader to drive this. And there were a lot of ideas about what this should look like. There were a lot of ideas about technology, about what kind of platform it should be built on. There were a lot of ideas about what it should look like, what the main feature set should be. There were a lot of ideas that the executive team had. And so what we really needed to do was get through these ideas and make some of the critical ideas, the one-way door ideas or one-way door decisions very, very quickly. So within the organization, I expressed that there were really 3 types of decisions that we needed to make and that we were going to be making along this innovation project. The first is one-way door decisions. And in that case, a spider will be written and discussed and reviewed with all the important and relevant stakeholders, right? And then documented so that everything was really clear. The second type of decision was a critical 2-way door decision. And in that case, the spider was discussed with the team and presented to the C team, right? So, so in that case, whatever that small group of people was, whoever that approver and advocate and the folks who needed to be consulted were, that would be discussed with them, but not necessarily with the entire C team, but we would present it to the C team, okay? And at that point, you know, they could reopen it or ask a little bit of re-examination, but that was their only chance, right? Like, that's it. We're gonna present it to you. Once we presented it to you and made the decision, we're moving forward. And then the other one was a team level 2-way door decision, which, you know, we did not present to anybody. And when a product manager wanted to make a decision, again, based on limited data, based on what we knew, they would often, you know, kind of say like, can I just make this decision? And in that case, I would say, yes, write just a mini spider, just to document what you're doing and why. So a mini spider was literally that document, but it was like half a page long, right? They just did the minimum just to say like, you know, here's the situation, here's the decision that needs to be made. I made it, Tatyana approved it. Here were the 2 ideas we were deciding between, and we decided on this one because, and just like one sentence, right? So that was super easy to just move through the team level decisions. But again, having that document then meant that if anybody questioned that or why it was made or who made it, or, you know, we at least could send them the document. I'll get to that in a second. So I met with each executive and critical stakeholder to document their point of view and their ideas, right? So again, each executive had pre-existing ideas and hypotheses, documenting each of these points of view and explicitly deciding what to pursue and not to pursue created a lot of buy-in, right? People felt heard. They trusted the process. It was very transparent. It was documented. Nothing was happening like behind closed doors because it was all written down. And what we decided not to pursue was very clear to everybody. The documents, the spiders themselves, were posted in the shared folder and in Slack for anyone in the organization to reference. This is also really important, that these documents can be sent within the organization. So this was really meant to create a culture where questions about decisions, why a decision was made, who made it, when it was made, are proactively and transparently answered, right? This creates a lot of trust as well. And having that transparency is really, really important. So one thing for all of you to keep in mind, and some people say this feels like overkill to make decisions, right? We make decisions just fine in meetings. I have found throughout my career that meetings have no memory, right? People are in meeting after meeting after meeting, and the meeting itself does not create any memory. Plus, you have the following dynamic: new people join the organization. Even if people who are in the meeting remember what was said, new people join and want to question what's going on. So the documentation of decisions is really key to preventing revisiting of them. And revisiting decisions can slow down or even sabotage, right, innovation projects. So when you have it's like a superpower that when people ask, wait, was this decision really made? Who made it? When was it made? Why wasn't I consulted? But is anybody in marketing involved? It's like a superpower to say, why don't I send you the spider? And then if you want to talk about it, let me know, right? Because you're not defensive, you're not answering these, questions one-off. You're saying, look, I have a process and I have a system, and I value that everybody is informed about why these decisions were made, by whom, and how, right? And it just builds a lot of trust in what's going on. Okay, so we have another question here, and China or China, could you come off mute and maybe ask your question? It's a little bit long, and I would love some context. Is it possible to come off mute?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. My name's China. I work for a company called Bohast in London. My
Great.
question is, how do you escape this feeling that many people have, especially in a more early stage business, feeling like they need to have input in every decision that's being made?
Mhm.
You were talking a lot then about trust, and actually there have been some really good comments in the chat about how to build that trust and around that. But I just feel like it's really, really a common problem, especially in those smaller businesses, but I'm sure is prevalent in much bigger ones too.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the key, one of the key issues that this process is meant to address, is that everyone feels that they need input. They need to have their input heard. And one way to do this is to do it in a Google Doc and to send it to people and have them comment on it. That's another thing, right? So if there is a culture where everyone feels, hey, if there's a culture in the organization that everyone is entitled to have their input heard on a decision, that is easily solved with this process, because you can send it as a Google Doc and have people comment, not add ideas, right? But comment on new ideas that they would like added, or, add their comments as to what's happening. So that's another advantage of having this in a document and having the process being run through a document, is that you can do it that way. And I have done that as well in other organizations where everybody felt like, wait, everybody, this affects everybody. Everybody should have input. And I'm like, okay, everyone has, like, I sent an email to the whole organization and said, the spider is up, please comment, within 4 days. And because we'll be having the meeting to make the decision on this date. Right? So that can help. China, does that help?
Yeah, that does definitely. A lot of people are mentioning, yeah, someone's just mentioned using Notion in the chat, and I think that's a really good tool too. I think the flip side is that some execs might not feel like they have the time to read a document, but love to sit in a room with you for 15 minutes and brain dump their ideas. That would be my counter to that from experience.
So that is true. So with executives, you do want to give them the time. Like if there's a C-suite executive, yes, you meet with them. But if you have a culture where everybody, right, feels entitled to their opinion being heard, you send them the doc and to ask them to comment. Yeah. But if you have a top executive, I do think they need to be heard. Yeah. I mean, that's just reality in terms of how, as you said, they're limited in time. They're used to having more of these conversations, and that, and then documenting whatever they said in that document is also really important. So, okay, great. Maybe how about one more? Vandana, can you come off of mute?
Yeah, hey there.
Hello.
Yeah, so my question was around, I like the point you said about having everyone sort of be a part of the ideas, right? Like inquire and make sure that they are also included in giving ideas. And there can be these ideas. The example that you use was, you have someone who gives a completely infeasible idea, for example, but you don't want to just demotivate it right there, but want to have it as part of this wider conversation. So I guess like especially for senior leadership who wants to come in with an idea, I guess what's the best strategy to walk that line of demotivating it in a way that doesn't affect losing trust or just dismissing the idea entirely?
So as I mentioned, when you have somebody like the CRO or the CMO, like a top leader, right, who has an idea that they're really pretty attached to and feel that they've thought quite a bit about, you want to document it in the spider as one of the ideas. And in the cons section, you want to say, look, no idea is actually infeasible, but you want to say, this would take redoing our entire architecture and would require 2 years of work or whatever. You know what I mean? So you want to like objectively answer why the idea is not something that you want to pursue.
Yeah.
Because if that does not happen, in my experience, they will feel like you just dismiss them. Or if you say, even privately, hey, this idea is not feasible, they won't really believe, like they'll still feel dismissed. Or there's a good chance they will still feel dismissed and like you didn't really take them seriously, and they didn't go back to the engineering team to really think about what it would take to do it. But if you actually write down in the cons section, because of our current architecture, in order to pursue this idea, it would take us, 2 years of 3 engineering teams, right? That really, I mean, demotivates the idea in a very objective way, right?
Yeah. That helps. Yeah.
Okay. So a few key takeaways here, and then we'll go to another Q&A in a minute. So the first is that this is part of the product innovation course because it does require new skills and mindsets. And one of those is making decisions with a lot of ambiguity, uncertainty, and limited or no data, right? And so there is a huge chasm between what it takes to successfully manage an existing product and to successfully create a new product out of nothing. And relying on methods for mature product management leads to, we all know this, right? 90% failure rates in product innovation, right? 90% of startups fail. Those are essentially innovation projects. And it's very hard to do those. And so we have to just wrap our minds around that it takes different skills. But successful innovation within large enterprises is possible. Innovation within a large company requires new product and organizational skills, right? And lots of companies are able to do this, and they do it by using different mindsets, different frameworks, different ways of aligning, what this is really about. And one of the things I'd love for all of you to take away from today's session as well is around key decisions. Think like a GM, not just like a product manager. So in order to get your key decisions to really stick, remember, product decisions, everybody feels like they have skin in the game about what the product should be. Everybody feels that they have an opinion on product, right? Whether they're in marketing or sales or finance or sometimes even HR, right? And so you need to think like a general manager, think cross-functionally, and remember that you are responsible for all of the factors required to make good product decisions and leading the success of your product, right? And using this spider framework and going through some of the processes I talked about that's really helped me a lot. It's helped a lot of the folks I advised, and I hope it will help you. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the course, and then as I do so, just type in more questions and upvote some questions while I talk. So Product Innovation, the course kicks off on February 6th. It has 4 modules. The first is really determining innovation strategy, which is different than product strategy because it is much more expansive to getting to the organization's either top line or bottom line goals and really aligning very precisely on what is the financial goal of the innovation project and in what time frame. We're also going to be talking about generative AI innovation and how to get started with some frameworks around what do you do when your CEO says, hey, what are we doing with generative AI in our product strategy? Like, how do you start that conversation? Then we go into working backwards from the customer. We're going to get really, really practical in how to select a job to be, like everybody knows about jobs to be done, but how do you actually select one and operationalize it so that it really drives your product development? That's where I think a lot of people fall down in jobs to be done. They have a long list of jobs to be done from customer discovery, and then they can't align on which one do we pick that's really going to be the scaffold, right, for our product. We're going to be talking about innovation culture as well, in terms of like how do you actually build those skill sets to build an innovation culture where you're making a lot of decisions with limited data. How do you deal with that? What are the metrics that you put in place for your team? And then a lot on execution and delivery. The Spider document is part of that execution and delivery. We also talk about a way of developing and determining product vision and product strategy and product priorities specifically for a product innovation project, which is very different. And then we talk about when to launch. And I'm going to get everybody off of the MVP thing because it's just not helpful. Because when is a product viable? I don't know. Everybody has a different, opinion about when a product is viable. But when is a product sellable? How do you define a minimum sellable product? That is something that is really concrete. That really helps people figure out when to launch their product in a much more precise way than this MVP thing. And we also have 3 amazing featured guests coming. My friend Natalia, Kintan, Leslie. Natalia and Kintan are 2 of the top generative AI leaders and innovators in Silicon Valley. Natalia recently worked as the AI product leader at Meta, and she is now building her own thing at Storm Ventures. Kintan was the GM and head of a lot of the AI work that was done at Amazon Music, and now he has his own AI startup called Alto AI. And then Leslie Witt, who is just an incredible customer-centric product leader, who was formerly the VP of Product and Design at Intuit for QuickBooks, and now she's the Chief Product Officer of Headspace Health. So great featured guests, amazing conversations, and they're all really no nonsense. We did run this course in the summer, had really great reviews about the practicality of the course, right? This isn't just frameworks, it's real stories, real ways of doing this, no nonsense conversation. Hopefully you've heard I'm no nonsense. All the featured guests are also no nonsense. They're not going to sugarcoat things. This is really hard. Product innovation is hard. It's political. And we get into all of that. And we're looking to deliver really practical advice here. And we, for this cohort versus the last one, we have more actionable content, real world examples, and a more intimate course experience. The first one was very large, and people said they wanted it to be a little bit smaller. So that's going to be a little bit more intimate this time as well. And you can sign up here at Product Innovation. So I am going to go back, and I think you have until February 5th to sign up. Is that right, Eleanor? Or is it like a week in advance? Well,
Nope, you have until February 5th. Yeah, until the day off.
Okay, great. Okay, great. All right, Sarah, you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you. So I'm a first-time PM and the first PM at a medical device company. We're in the women's health space, so obviously regulated. And there's a big mindset of we're a startup, we need to move fast and make decisions. Oftentimes, the right people aren't pulled into the room. Even as the PM, sometimes I find out about a decision. And it's pretty shocking because it also completely changes my product requirements, might not be centered on the user. And it also totally goes against the culture that they're trying to establish of transparency. So I'd be really curious to hear about how you kind of push back on that mindset and help kind of manage some change into processes.
Yeah. So it's very hard to ask other people to do things first, is what I found. So when I have tried to change that culture of decision making, when I came into Pendo and I brought the spider framework in, I did it first. But then I also, people really liked it. The CEO really liked it. And then he started asking other teams to do it and other people to do it. And so I think that one of the things that I would recommend is, can you step in and say, hey, this decision affected my product. I'm just going to write up a quick spider just so that I can understand and document the decision. And then the next time the decision is, then you present it and you say, hey, the next time you're considering a decision, can we put something like that? Can whoever's doing this, can they put something like this together? Oh, and I'm happy to help if it affects my product, right? So when you have something that you're doing for other people that you can set an example around, or that you can role model, that shows that they're getting the value, as opposed to just you wanting to be involved in the decision. So you see what I'm saying? Like, you want to create a dynamic where you are adding value to them by creating transparency into their decision-making process. Right? Because the flip side of that, Sarah, is that you're going to have people in your organization being like, oh, Sarah feels like she needs to be in the room for every, decision. Right? You don't want to be that person. You don't want to be the person who's like, well, if the decision is made without me in the room, then I'm not going to listen to it, or I'm going to get upset about it. Right? You want to be the person who says like, oh, hey, I heard this decision was made. It affects me. I just want to get clarity around it. So let me write this thing up for you and for the organization and for my team, who now I have to communicate this to. Do you think that could work?
It definitely could. It definitely could. Thank you.
All right, awesome. All right, Sally, want to come off mute?
Yeah, there has been a lot of great tips. So my question is that if you are already in the middle of a project that has been, decision has been made behind the door, and you don't necessarily agree, how can you use the framework to course correct?
So this is, you can definitely use this framework to course correct. You can say, hey, I need to now communicate this to the rest of the organization and to the engineers. So I'm going to use the spider framework to document what happened and document the decision. That gives you now the power of being the documenter, right? And as you do so, you can start to point out cons in the decision that was actually made. And you can add your own idea about an alternative which hopefully is a course correction and not a completely different thing, but maybe it's a completely different thing. And then when when you kind of, you probably should have a meeting with people about it and to say, hey, in the process of documenting this decision, a few cons came up and I just, want to bring them up and discuss them and see if we can adjust the decision slightly to this other idea based on the cons that came up or based on some issues that came up that, maybe we weren't aware of when the decision was made. You think that could work?
Yeah. So kind of, I'm trying to be helpful here and then point out the cons. Thanks.
Exactly. So again, remember, like the value of this thing, nobody wants to write up a document, right? Like nobody wants to do it. So if you're the person who's be like, I'll write up this document for you, you're also essentially playing now the role of the advocate because you get to really, frame, right? What kind of recommendation comes out, what kind of idea, like what are the pros and cons of the idea, all of that. So, if it's really something that is affecting you, you should have been the advocate for the idea in the first place. And if you weren't, you get to course correct by being helpful as a documenter, right? All right, awesome. And Maddie, decision-making culture. Let's talk about what is like, do you want to just give us a little bit more context about your culture or what's going on with you?
Yeah. So I've experienced a culture where totally well-meaning, effectively C-suite of where I work can sometimes have kind of closed-door conversations and decision-making, and those things impact the product team and others. And so I'm trying to figure out, how to essentially get a seat at that table when those discussions happen in a way that's not like, hey, you guys are doing something wrong. Like, you guys aren't equipped to make these decisions, because that's not the message I'm trying to send, but I want to make it more collaborative. I think it will ultimately be better for everyone, but I'm struggling on how to get that message across.
So I've been in an organization where the C team made a lot of decisions in the Monday meeting that affected a lot of other people. And then we would come out of the meeting and like tell them about it. This is one of the reasons that like I put this framework together, by the way. So again, this is incredibly helpful to say, like, you will not be in the room when these decisions are made. You will not. So is there a way to still have your voice heard and still be informed about what's happening when the decision is made, right? That's your goal. And so I do think one of the things, if there's a chief product officer that you report into, who's the person representing product in these decisions, can you and that person work together to make sure that any product decision that is made by the executive team has the structure in place? And that person like can tell you, hey, we're going to probably discuss this thing on Monday, for example. This is what I would do with my PMs. Hey, we're probably going to discuss what's going to happen with this particular area of the product at the Monday C team meeting. Can you write up a quick spider so that we have the context and we can, and you can give us the context and basically be part of the decision, even though you're not going to be in the room. So can you frame the decision for them in a better way, knowing that you're not going to be there when they decide?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because I think part of the issue is sometimes they don't have the full picture, and nor should they in all the cases. It's not their job. But I would like the opportunity to provide that. So maybe it's a matter of just me getting ahead of it.
Yeah, the other thing that happens, what tends to happen, or that can happen when you have that kind of thing, is if you send a document with the context, they may realize, wait a second, we need to have Maddie in the room when we make this decision because we need we need her to answer questions real time about this. So what they'll sometimes do is just send you an invite for a 15-minute slot during the much longer C-team meeting for you to come in, right, for that decision to be made, right, with your context. But again, they need to somehow know that you're trying to be helpful, right, not whining about the fact that you wanted to be part of the decision, right? And so, yeah, so like, I do think like just using this structure to say, let me write up the situation and the pros and the cons of the different ideas so that you can actually have a really good and informed conversation when you make this decision. And then there's a probably 20% chance that they'll actually invite you in the room for that, if you do that. But if you don't do that, it's unlikely to change, I would say. Yeah. All right, well, we are at time. Thank you all very much.